I remember the sound the clock made the moment the door shut behind them. It was a thick silence, the kind you could mistake for peace if you didn't know better. But I knew better. That wasn't peace. It was abandonment. That sound, the final slam of the front door, was the punctuation mark at the end of everything I had ever built for them. 3 days out of the hospital. That's how long it took. I was still wearing the compression socks they gave me after the surgery. I hadn't even figured out how to hold a fork in my left hand yet. My right hand trembled so violently it couldn't carry soup from bowl to mouth. And still they left. My son, my daughter-in-law, the two people I thought I could count on, even when the rest of the world turned gray. I just think she needs a place with professionals, she had said, barely glancing in my direction, as though I couldn't hear, as though I hadn't raised her husband from a boy into a man. Or so I thought. She'll be better cared for. He agreed, eyes fixed on his phone. They didn't wait for me to object, didn't ask what I wanted. They had already packed their bags, told the neighbors we were downsizing, and given the keys to some boy with a clipboard who worked for the elder care agency. I didn't even know his name. What no one tells you about being betrayed by your own blood is that it doesn't feel like a sharp stab. It's not cinematic like that. It's a slow exhale that never fills your lungs back up. It's lying in a bed you once bought on sale after a promotion at work, trying to remember who you were before you became a burden. The nursing home wasn't cruel. That's the tricky part. It was just blank. Beige walls, plastic flowers, television reruns from 20 years ago. Every staff member was polite but distant. They called me Mrs. Elliott even after I told them my name was Joan. Joan, the woman who once hiked 6 miles for charity. Joan, who used to throw dinner parties that lasted until midnight. Joan, who had a library of books all lined up alphabetically, even the cookbooks. Now, I was just a resident, one of many, someone who needed help being wheeled to the lunchroom and who sometimes forgot the day of the week. But I didn't forget what they did. I remembered every single word, every shrug, every avoidance, every time my son said, "It's just temporary," and looked away. Every time my daughter-in-law said, "She needs more than we can give," while taking another selfie in my kitchen. And yet, the worst part wasn't the betrayal. It was the emptiness that followed. No confrontation, no fight, just silence. Like I had been erased, not rejected. That silence echoed inside me louder than any scream ever could. I couldn't sleep the first week, not because of the ache in my bones or the stiffness in my shoulder, but because I kept hearing the click of that door, the finality in it, the decision they made without me, about me. I'd given them everything. My youth spent working double shifts so my son could have piano lessons. My home open every holiday, every emergency, every petty breakup or celebration. My savings drained when he lost his first job and needed a little help getting back on track. And now they had what they wanted. Freedom, clean hands, a mother stored neatly on a shelf where she wouldn't interfere. But here's the thing they didn't know. You can't silence someone by removing their audience. You just make their voice sharper, quieter, more precise. And I had so much to say. I started keeping a notebook. It wasn't dramatic, just something the physical therapist gave me to track my hand coordination. But I used it for more than that. I started writing. Scribbles at first. Thoughts, memories, questions. The kind of questions you don't ask out loud because the answers are too ugly. When did I become invisible? What was the moment they stopped seeing me as human? Why do people think kindness is disposable? I didn't know what I would do with these questions. Maybe nothing, maybe everything, but they filled the silence. They filled me. They gave me back a shape, a spine, a pulse. They left me with nothing, but that's where they made their mistake, because nothing can be rebuilt into anything. Before all this, before the beige walls, the whispered conversations, the slow betrayal, dressed up as concern, I was someone. I wasn't rich, I wasn't famous, but I was known. People knew me at the grocery store, the bank, the library. They knew me because I was dependable. The woman who never forgot a birthday, who organized school, bake sales with military precision, who taught Sunday school even when the heating broke. I was the woman who raised her son with both hands and a bruised back, who never asked for much, only that he try his best. And he did for a while. His name is Daniel. I called him Danny when he was little. He hated it. By the time he was 13, said it sounded childish, so I stopped. But in my heart, he was always my Danny, the little boy with scraped knees and a habit of picking dandelions, just because he liked how yellow they were. I raised him alone. His father, Robert, was a man with a quick smile and quicker fists. He left when Daniel was 6, or rather, I made him leave. After the 3rd time, I had to explain the bruises on my arm as just a fall. I didn't cry when he left. I'd done all my crying in the bathroom with the tap running years before. From that day on, it was just us, me and my boy. We moved into a smaller apartment closer to my sister's, and I worked nights as a hotel receptionist so I could be there in the mornings to pack his lunch. He hated crusts. I never forgot to cut them off. Those years weren't easy, but they were full of homework sprawled across the kitchen table, full of mismatched socks and science fair disasters, full of laughter that came easily, not like now, when at FI gave him everything I had. I didn't date. I didn't travel. I saved. I put away a little every month, pretending it was for retirement, but knowing deep down it would go toward his college. And it did. When the letter came from Columbia, I cried like I'd won the lottery. He got in on a scholarship, but the books, the travel, the housing, that was me. Every dollar I squirreled away in paper envelopes, every raise I fought for every birthday, I skipped celebrating for the sake of one more shift. And I never once resented it. Not when I missed holidays. Not when my friends took cruises and I stayed home. Not even when I fell asleep, sitting up because I was too tired to lie down. Because I believed it would matter. I believed he would remember that someday when he had his own family, he would look at me and say, "You were the reason I made it." And for a while, he did remember. When he graduated, he hugged me so tight, I thought my ribs would crack. He whispered, "I couldn't have done this without you, Mom." I held on to that moment like it was gold. He met her a year later, Emily. I won't lie, she was lovely at first. Polished, polite, the kind of girl who knew the right fork to use at a formal dinner and never forgot to say thank you. I liked her. I wanted to like her more. But something in her smile always seemed rehearsed, like she was playing a part she didn't want to keep. They moved in together 6 months later. Then came the wedding, small, expensive, very curated. I was there, of course, paid for the catering when Daniel's bonus came up short, wore the dress Emily picked, smiled in the photos, even when I felt like a prop. Then the visits grew sparse, the calls shorter. Daniel started saying things like, "We're just so busy," And you understand right. I said I did. I always said I did. Then came the whispers. She's too involved. She doesn't give us space. Maybe she needs help. I overheard one conversation through a crack in the guest room door. She's not getting any younger, Emily had said. She just needs to let go a bit, Daniel replied. I stood there holding a tray of folded laundry, realizing I'd already been put into a category, not mother, not even family, just an obligation. After the stroke, it didn't take long for them to act. 3 days. That's how long it took for them to find a place, sign the papers, move my things. They said it was for my safety, but I know the truth. They didn't want the burden. They didn't want to look at the woman who gave them everything and see the price of their comfort. And even now, even after all that, I still catch myself making excuses for them. Maybe they were overwhelmed. Maybe Emily pushed him. Maybe Daniel was just scared. Maybe. But there's one thing I've stopped telling myself, that it was love. Because love doesn't abandon you when you're weakest. Love doesn't turn away from the hand that once fed it. And love sure as hell doesn't call a nursing home a fresh start. You don't wake up one morning and realize you've been forgotten. It creeps in like rust, slow, quiet, and destructive. The change was never one moment. It was a series of little silences, the missed calls, the short visits, the way Daniel's hand stopped resting on my shoulder when he hugged me, how he started patting my back instead, like I was a co-worker, not his mother. And Emily, well, she was always polite. She brought wine. I couldn't drink lit candles that gave me headaches, and smiled too much with her lips and never enough with her eyes. But it was the small things that hurt most, like when she rearranged my pantry without asking, when she accidentally donated my old photo albums to a thrift store because she thought they were junk, or when she laughed and said, "Oh, she still writes checks," like I was some antique on display. I let it go, again and again, because that's what mothers do. But love, real love, isn't supposed to make you smaller. And I was shrinking, dimming, disappearing. I think the first time I truly felt it, the absence of being needed, was Daniel's 36th birthday. I had made his favorite chicken pot pie, the way his grandmother taught me crust from scratch. I cleaned the apartment, set the table, even ironed a linen tablecloth. He texted me 3 hours before dinner. "Hey, Mom, M's boss invited us to this industry mixer. Can we rain check dinner, rain check?" I sat at that table alone, ate 2 bites, and cried when I threw the rest out. Not because he canceled, but because he didn't even ask how long I'd been preparing. He didn't see the effort. He didn't see me. I started sleeping later after that, stopped curling my hair, gave up on sending holiday cards. What was the point, really? The world keeps spinning, whether you smile or not. Then the stroke came, sudden, sharp. I was folding towels when the left side of my body just stopped responding. I remember thinking, this is how it ends. In the laundry room, the hospital was cold. They did what they could, ran tests, inserted IVs, poked and prodded. I was alert, but trapped. My mouth wouldn't cooperate, and the words I tried to say fell out in broken pieces. Daniel visited once, just once. He stood awkwardly at the foot of the bed, hands in his coat pockets, talking more to the nurse than to me. "She seems stable," he said. "That's good, right?" The nurse smiled, but I could see the pity in her eyes. He didn't ask if I was scared. He didn't hold my hand. He left after 20 minutes, citing traffic. And that night, I lay there staring at the fluorescent ceiling, knowing in my gut that I was no longer his priority. maybe not even his person. I thought I'd be taken home after a few days of rehab. I imagined sitting in my recliner, warm tea, in hand the TV, playing some old cooking show in the background. I even imagined Daniel stopping by every weekend to check in, bringing groceries, or asking if I needed help with the mail. That was the story I wrote in my head. Reality was colder. They moved me from the hospital to the care facility with brisk efficiency, like I was a package being rerouted. The nurse handed me a clipboard with release forms, and Daniel nodded like he had done me a favor. "You'll be safer here, Mom. You'll have people to look after you." I looked him in the eye and said I just wanted to go home. He didn't answer, just looked away. That was when I knew. This wasn't about safety. It wasn't about care. It was about erasing the responsibility, putting me somewhere out of sight, out of mind. I wasn't his mother anymore. I was a task to be delegated, a problem to be outsourced. And still, I didn't scream, didn't protest, because what would have been the point? They had already decided. My voice had no weight in their world anymore. But in that quiet room, beige and humming with fluorescent lights, something else stirred, something deep, something old. It wasn't rage, not quite. It was a kind of sorrow that calcified into steel. And I made a decision if I no longer mattered in their world, I would build a new one. And I would do it in silence, because silence, I've learned, is not the absence of power. Sometimes it is the power. It began with a blue spiral notebook, the kind they give to school children with wide-ruled lines and a flimsy cardboard cover. The nurse handed it to me after my occupational therapy session and said, "Use this to practice writing. Just a few lines a day will help." I don't think she expected me to write more than my name, but I wrote everything. At first, it was simple observations. What time the nurse brought pills, what food they served, when the light flickered in the hallway. But slowly, the writing turned inward. I started recording memories, facts, conversations. I wrote down exactly what Daniel had said at the hospital, the way Emily glanced at her phone when I told her I missed baking. I wrote about the casserole dish I gave them that was never returned. The necklace I noticed was missing from my jewelry box, the mail that had stopped coming once they changed the forwarding address. It wasn't petty. It was preparation. Because something in me, something sharp and long dormant, began to awaken. This wasn't just a betrayal. This was an erasure. They weren't just leaving me behind. They were rewriting me, reducing me, editing me out of the very life I built. So I began gathering the pieces. I asked for copies of my medical records. I called shakily, with my left hand, the bank to check my account balances. I requested old tax returns. I had a nurse help me file a request for my retirement statements. And what I found startled me. There were gaps, transfers I didn't remember authorizing. A joint account I hadn't realized was opened under my name. Life insurance paperwork with someone else listed as primary contact, not me. Daniel's name appeared in places it shouldn't have. And worse, Emily's name appeared in places it definitely shouldn't. At first I thought maybe it was a mistake, some clerical oversight. But then I remembered the way Daniel brushed past my questions. How he said, "Don't worry about it, Mom. I've got it all handled." How he insisted on handling my bills after the stroke, just until you're better. But I wasn't better. And he wasn't just helping. He was maneuvering, positioning. It was then I realized I wasn't just discarded. I was harvested. They were taking the life I'd built, the finances, the paperwork, the home, and transferring it all into something they could use, own, profit from, and no one was stopping them. Because who listens to a woman in a wheelchair with slurred speech? But I still had one thing they didn't count on: time. Hours stretched endlessly here. Days bled together, and while they thought I was wasting away, I was documenting, studying, remembering. I called a lawyer, a young woman named Carla, who came once a month to speak with residents about wills and elder rights. She had a kind voice and sharp eyes. I told her I had some questions. At first she was polite, but reserved the way people are when they think you just want someone to talk to. But then I showed her my notebook, the dates, the transfers, the inconsistencies. She stopped smiling halfway through page 3. By the time she finished page 10, her voice had changed. "This might be more serious than you realize," she said. Oh, I realized. I asked her to help me file a request for financial review. I gave her my power of attorney, carefully legally, with witnesses. I had the notary from the facility sign it. I asked Carla to request every document my son had filed on my behalf, every loan, every payment, every signature. And I asked her one final thing: don't tell them I know. Because if they thought I was weak, I wanted them to keep thinking it. Let them believe I was fading. Let them believe I was grateful for the little they offered. Let them underestimate me. And while they looked away, I kept building, page by page, proof by proof. I wrote down the way the facility director flinched when I asked who had paid for my placement. Turns out Daniel didn't pay out of pocket. He used my own account, my own money, for a room I didn't choose. I wrote about the necklace I saw on Emily's Instagram, the one she wore with a strapless dress, captioned "My Lucky Charm." It was my necklace, a gift from my mother. I recognized the chipped clasp, and I wrote about the letter that arrived addressed to me but sent care of Daniel. It was from a property management firm asking for confirmation on the sale of my house, the one I had lived in for 41 years, the one I raised Daniel in, sold without my signature. I circled the return address and showed Carla. She didn't speak for a long moment, just pressed her lips together and said, "We'll take care of it." And I believed her. Because by then, I wasn't the helpless woman in the corner anymore. I was a woman on a quiet warpath. I didn't want revenge. I wanted clarity. I wanted every lie exposed, every theft dragged into the light. And I wanted to do it my way, slow, steady, and absolutely silent. It happened on a Tuesday, the kind of Tuesday where nothing should happen. The sky was dull. The breakfast was mushy eggs. The hallway TV was playing a rerun of some courtroom drama with laughable acting. But it was my courtroom that was about to open. Carla had scheduled a meeting, just a review, she'd said. Nothing official yet. I want to get them both in the room. I want to see how they respond. So they came. Daniel walked in first, still in his lawyer casual uniform sport coat, no tie, smug air of competence. Emily followed, crisp white blouse, beige pencil skirt, manicured to perfection. She smiled when she saw me, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Hi, Mom," Daniel said, like we were meeting for lunch, not standing on the edge of a cliff. Emily went to kiss my cheek. I turned my face. "Let's sit," Carla said, firm but polite. The room was small, just a staff conference room with plastic chairs and a faint scent of lemon cleaner. Carla placed a stack of folders on the table, Her hand rested gently on the top. I wanted to go over a few things regarding Mrs. Elliott's financial and medical arrangements, she began. Daniel chuckled. I think we've got all that under control. Carla smiled, but it was the kind of smile that precedes a storm. Actually, that's the problem. She opened the top folder. It began slowly. Dates forms, signatures, all laid out. Every page was a stone, lifted, revealing what squirmed underneath. You opened this joint account without documented consent, Carla said, tapping the paper. She told me to, Daniel said quickly. I didn't. I replied, voice thin but steady. You listed yourself as her primary health proxy, Carla continued. Yet, there's no signed authorization. I just wanted to help, Daniel said. And you used her funds, over $14,000, to place her in this facility, without power of attorney, without consent. You signed the forms electronically. I thought she needed care. You sold her home. Emily flinched. Carla pulled out the final document, a copy of the real estate sale agreement. Daniel's name as seller. My name nowhere. She's not capable of managing property. Emily interjected, voice raised now. She had a stroke. I wasn't declared incompetent, I said. Emily's mouth snapped shut. I looked at Daniel. My son, my boy, the one I used to tuck in at night, the one who called me mama when he was sick and needed ginger tea, and my hand stroking his forehead. He didn't meet my gaze. Carla spoke next, precise, clipped. This is financial exploitation. At minimum, we are looking at legal restitution, possibly criminal liability. Mrs. Elliott has chosen to pursue legal action. Emily stood. Are you serious? You're going to ruin his life over a misunderstanding. I turned to her, my hand steady in my lap. You already ruined mine. I'm just taking it back. Daniel looked pale now, sweat beading at his temple. His voice broke slightly. Mom, we thought we were helping. No, I said. You thought I wouldn't notice. The silence after that was the loudest thing in the room. Carla began outlining next steps, investigation, asset freeze, potential court orders. But I didn't hear her. Not really. I was watching Daniel, watching the moment it clicked that he had underestimated me, that I wasn't his silent, shrinking mother anymore. I was something else now. He tried to speak again, to explain, but I raised my hand, and for the first time in my life, I cut him off. You chose convenience over compassion, I said. I won't be your afterthought anymore. He nodded just once, not in understanding, but in fear. Inpin. Akar. Emily stormed out. Daniel stayed seated for a while longer. Then, finally, he whispered, You're really going through with this, I already have. I said. When they left, Carla turned to me. Are you okay? I nodded. But the truth was, I wasn't. Not yet. Because justice isn't relief. It's just the beginning. I returned to my room, sat by the window, watched the wind lift the leaves from the trees like it was cleansing the air. I didn't cry. Not because it didn't hurt, but because, for the first time in a long time, I had reclaimed something far more powerful than sympathy. I had reclaimed myself. After the confrontation, the air around me shifted. Not dramatically, not in some cinematic way, but subtly, like the first cool breeze after a long, punishing summer. There was no applause, no parade, just a strange quiet in my chest where pain used to echo. It wasn't over, of course. Legal proceedings take time. Carla warned me there would be paperwork, court dates, investigations. But she also told me something else, and it stayed with me. You didn't just take a stand, Mrs. Elliott. You built a boundary, and now you get to decide who steps over it. It was the first time in years anyone had made me feel powerful. The facility staff treated me differently too. I wasn't just Mrs. Elliot in room 213 anymore. I was the woman who had filed a legal case against her own family. There was a quiet respect in their voices now, like they'd seen someone survive a shipwreck and swim back to shore. Some of them looked at me with sadness, others with awe. But I didn't care what they saw. I only cared that I could look at myself again. I began rebuilding my routines on my terms. Woke up early, asked for stronger tea, sat by the window with my notebook and wrote, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. The pages no longer held secrets or evidence. They held reflections, memories I wanted to keep, not ones I had to survive. I started physical therapy with renewed purpose. My left hand still trembled, but it was steadier now. My gait was uneven, but my spine felt straighter. I even managed the hallway with just a cane one morning, and when the nurse gasped, I laughed, an actual from-the-belly laugh that surprised us both. I wrote a letter to my sister, whom I hadn't spoken to in years. She called me the next evening, her voice thick with guilt and love. "I didn't know what they were doing to you," she said. "Neither did I replied. "But I do now." We talked for an hour. She offered to visit. I said yes. People began showing up again, not the ones I had once centered my entire life around, but people who saw me as I was now, stronger in silence, steady in solitude. Women from the facility invited me to their evening bingo. A volunteer brought me a set of watercolors when she heard I used to paint. I hadn't touched a brush in 20 years, but the first stroke on that blank page felt like breathing again. One night, I stood at the mirror, really looked. The lines around my mouth were deeper, the gray in my hair more pronounced. My eyes had changed too, not dull sharper, not angry aware. For years I had built my life around being everything for everyone, a good mother, a helpful mother-in-law, a selfless woman. And where had it gotten me? Discarded, forgotten, stashed away like seasonal decor. But now I was choosing something different. Not vengeance, not bitterness, but self-respect. Carla told me the preliminary court date was set. She would represent me. She was confident, even careful in her wording. There's a strong case here. What they did won't just disappear. Whether it's restitution or criminal liability, there will be accountability. I didn't smile when she said it, not because I wasn't glad, but because I had stopped tying my peace to outcomes. I was learning to live with the quiet, not the hollow, neglectful kind, but the full-bodied, earned kind. The kind that rises when you stop waiting for someone else to choose you. The kind that forms when you choose yourself and mean it. Daniel hadn't reached out since the confrontation. Emily blocked me on every platform. I found out through Carla that they'd hired a lawyer. They were planning to fight back, but their paper trail was brittle, their signatures sloppy, their excuses thinner than they'd expected. I didn't care what they did anymore, because now I wasn't fighting them. I was rebuilding me. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't asking anyone's permission to do it. There's something powerful about not responding, about letting others shout spin twist while you stand still. They say silence is passive. They're wrong. Silence can be sharp, purposeful, strategic. That's what I learned as the legal wheels turned slowly but surely behind the scenes. Carla kept me informed. She handled the filings. The investigator assigned to the case had already confirmed multiple unauthorized transactions. And Daniel's lawyer, he had started sending panicked letters trying to clarify intentions and de-escalate the situation, but I didn't respond. Not in public, not in private. Let them squirm. They wanted me voiceless, dependent. They had written me off as someone too frail to notice, too grateful to resist, too tired to care. So now I let my silence speak louder than anything they could say. I didn't gloat. I didn't confront them online. I didn't call family to stir sympathy. No cryptic Facebook posts, no angry voicemails. Just nothing. Because I didn't need the last word. I already had the truth, and it was enough. One afternoon, Carla came by with a small smile. "They're trying to negotiate," she said. "Want to settle before it gets to court." I raised an eyebrow. What are they offering? Partial restitution? Some public apology they'll deliver at a hearing. I stared at her. No, she echoed, surprised. "I don't want their money, not on their terms." She nodded slowly, and I saw something flash in her eyes, admiration maybe, or respect. I leaned forward. If they want to make it right, they can show up in court. Let the world see what they did. I won't be hushed, because that was the real fight now, not about the house, or the bank accounts, or the necklace stolen and flaunted online. It was about reclaiming a name they tried to bury under the weight of convenience. My name, Joan Elliott, mother, survivor, not a footnote, not a line item on a spreadsheet, and certainly not theirs to silence. In the days that followed, I found a rhythm. I painted again, soft landscapes at first, then bolder strokes, then faces, women like me with storm clouds in their eyes and quiet defiance in the set of their mouths. The staff asked to hang one in the hallway. I said yes. I took walks even on unsteady legs, sat by the bird feeders, read poetry again, the kind with thorns and fire. I began requesting books from the local library. One of the volunteers called me our little rebel. I liked that, because I wasn't rebelling in flames. I was rebelling in presence, in not disappearing. One morning, I received a letter, handwritten, from Daniel. It was short. "Mom, I'm sorry. I didn't know how to handle everything. I thought I was doing what was best. I let him take the lead. I should have fought harder. For you. For what was right. There was no, 'I love you.' No offer to visit. No mention of the house or the court case or the money. Just guilt dressed as confession." I folded the letter and placed it in my drawer. Didn't respond. Because here's the thing about guilt. It belongs to the person who earned it, not at the one they hurt. I wasn't his mother to be pitied. I wasn't a lesson for him to learn too late. I was someone worth protecting, someone worth listening to, and I'd finally started listening to myself. Silence wasn't my punishment. It was my power, and I intended to wield it. I found the listing online by accident. Carla had mentioned she was gathering documentation from the property management company, and on a whim, I searched the address. There it was, my home. Staged for sale in bright, sterile photos, the living room stripped of our old bookshelves, the kitchen counters clear of the spice rack Daniel made for me in middle school. The walls painted pale gray, not the soft cream I'd chosen after saving coupons for months. But I knew the bones. I saw the scuff on the hallway floor where Danny had dropped his first skateboard, the window in the back bedroom that whistled when it rained, the corner in the living room where the Christmas tree always leaned a little, no matter how we straightened it. Gone, all of it. The photos made it look like I'd never lived there at all. That hurt more than I expected, not because of the walls or the furniture, but because of the erasure. It was like someone had taken a blade to my memories and scrubbed them clean for a better resale value. I closed the browser and stared at my reflection in the darkened screen. They took the house, but not the life lived in it. They couldn't unmake the nights I rocked my son to sleep through a fever. The mornings I woke at 5 a.m. to pack his lunch. The time he made me pancakes for Mother's Day and almost burned down the kitchen. That was mine, and they couldn't have it. Carla confirmed the sale had been completed using a forged signature, not even a convincing one. My name, traced like a child, trying to mimic handwriting they didn't understand. The investigators were stunned. The buyer, a young couple, had no idea. They'd been assured everything was above board. Carla asked me what I wanted. Do you want the house back? I thought about it. And then I shook my head. No, I said. Let it go. She blinked. Are you sure I don't want to live in memories? I want something new. Because it wasn't the physical space I craved. It was a sense of belonging, of agency, of being rooted in something of my choosing, not something handed down like a burden or stolen like a prize. Carla smiled softly. Then we'll make sure you get what's yours. I gave her full authority to pursue damages, to pursue every penny that had vanished under my son's name, every lie dressed up as legality, every inch of dignity I'd lost in that process. But me, I didn't look back. I spent my days differently now. I started a small art group with 2 other women in the facility. We painted with cheap brushes and leftover canvases, but our laughter was rich. We shared stories, not the polished ones we used to tell our children, but the messy, honest ones we only dared say now that we were older and tired of lying to ourselves. I wrote letters to women in shelters, survivors like me. Carla had connected me with a nonprofit, and I started sending them notes, just a few lines, handwritten full of the things I wish someone had said to me. You are not forgotten. You are not crazy. You are not weak for surviving. I didn't need a platform, just a pen. Some days I ached. My joints stiffened in the cold. My left hand still trembled. But I no longer saw these as signs of decay. They were reminders I was still here, and that mattered. Daniel didn't write again. He didn't call. Good. He didn't deserve the sound of my voice anymore. Emily's Instagram went quiet, a private account now. I imagined her world shrinking inch by inch until the truth caught up to her like smoke under a locked door. That wasn't my concern. My concern was me, my future, what I wanted, not just what I could salvage. I wasn't trying to rebuild the past anymore. I was laying down the foundation of something new. I didn't know what it would look like, but I knew what it wouldn't be. It wouldn't be silent submission. It wouldn't be waiting at windows for people who never came. It wouldn't be measuring my worth by how much I gave until I disappeared. No, this time I would measure it by how much of myself I kept. There's a peculiar kind of grief that follows you even after justice begins to unfold. Not the loud sobbing kind, but the quiet ache of realizing you poured decades of your life into people who never saw the weight of your sacrifice, or worse, who did and simply stepped over it. That's what lingered, not the money, not even the betrayal, but the years I couldn't get back, the birthday parties I planned down to the last detail, the sick days I spent by Daniel's bedside spoon-feeding soup and holding his feverish hand, the nights I stayed awake with worry when he missed curfew, the scraped knees, the first heartbreak, the college forms, the job interviews, the loan payments, the wedding planning, Every time he said, "Thanks, Mom," with that half smile, I held it close, like it meant something. But maybe it never did. Maybe it was just what I wanted it to mean. And yet I don't regret loving him. I regret not loving myself alongside him. It took all this, the stroke, the isolation, the theft, to remember I existed before I was his mother, before I was anyone's support system. I was a girl once, with a camera always slung over my shoulder, with wild hair and a love for thunderstorms. I used to dance barefoot in the kitchen. I once wrote a letter to a boy who never read it and never cried about it, because I knew my worth wasn't tied to someone else's response. Where did she go? The answer is, she didn't. She was buried under years of putting others first, but not gone, never gone. And now I see glimpses of her again, in the way I stretch my body in physical therapy, not just for recovery, but because I want to feel strong, in the way I eat breakfast by the window, humming softly to music no one else hears, in the way I say no now, without guilt, not because I'm angry, but because I finally realized I'm allowed to choose. One afternoon, a young nurse named Leah asked if I'd ever been married again after Daniel's father. No, I said. Not because I couldn't. I just didn't want to marry someone unless I felt freer with them than without them. She laughed. That's wise. Hard one, I replied. Leah started visiting me, on her breaks asking about old music, borrowing books I recommended. She reminded me of myself, curious, kind maybe, too eager to please. I told her not to wait until 70 to remember she matters. She squeezed my hand and said I won't. That meant more to me than any apology Daniel could ever offer. One evening, I stood in the garden behind the facility. It was small, fenced in, but they'd planted wildflowers. I closed my eyes and listened to the wind rustle the leaves, the far-off hum of traffic, the soft scrape of a rake against gravel. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel lost. I felt anchored to myself, not as a mother, not as a victim, but as a woman who survived being reduced and chose to expand instead. They had tried to shrink me, flatten me, store me away in a place where no one would listen. But I had listened to myself. And now when I speak, even in silence, my voice fills the room. Because I am not the echo of who I once was. I am the whole sound. I used to think that the worst thing someone could do was stop loving you. Now I know it's worse when they pretend they still do just enough to pacify their own guilt, not enough to actually show up. That was Daniel. That was Emily. They never screamed at me. They didn't hit or curse. They just vanished slowly while smiling, while calling it help. And when I finally saw it for what it was, neglect wrapped in politeness, exploitation wrapped in smiles, it nearly shattered me. Nearly, but I didn't break, because something deeper than rage began to build inside me, something sharper than grief. Resolve. They expected me to fade, to sit in this room and nod at the right times, to say thank you for scraps, to be grateful for betrayal disguised as responsibility. Instead, I stood up, not easily, not without pain, but I stood, and I made a promise not to hurt them, not to retaliate, but to never let myself disappear again. I no longer watched the news like I used to. I no longer followed the outside world as a distraction from my own. These days, I journaled. I painted. I learned the names of every nurse on the floor and remembered who liked chocolate and who didn't drink caffeine. I became present because when they took everything from me, I realized the one thing I still had time, and I wouldn't waste another second of it pretending I was okay with being mistreated. One afternoon, Carla visited with more updates. They've offered a full settlement now. House value, legal fees, damages. It's a lot. She said it softly, as if she didn't want to shake me with the scale of it. I nodded. Good, I said. But they can keep the apology. She smiled. You're sure I'm not doing this to be loved? I'm doing it to be heard. Later that night, I sat with a hot cup of tea by the window and thought about everything I'd given in this life. So much love, so much effort, so many chances. And I realized something that brought tears to my eyes, not from sorrow, but clarity. I deserve better, not just from Daniel, but from myself. I had made my whole life about service, about being good, being needed, being the dependable one, the fixer, the giver. And that's a beautiful thing. Until you give so much, you forget you're allowed to receive too. I'm not angry anymore. I'm awake. And that's far more dangerous to people like Daniel and Emily, because now I see everything, every manipulation, every excuse, every time I said, it's fine when it wasn't. And I will never say it again unless I mean it. In a way, I'm grateful. Not for the betrayal, but for the breaking. Because in the breaking, I found my shape again. And I finally know what it feels like to belong to myself. I don't need a parade. I don't need an audience. I just need this silence, the kind I chose. Because silence that comes from strength, that's not emptiness. It's presence. When you survive something like this, the kind of betrayal that splits your life into before and after, you're left standing in the wreckage, staring at pieces of who you were. At first, I thought I had to rebuild everything exactly as it was. But now I know not everything that breaks is meant to be restored. Some things need to stay shattered. So I took stock, piece by piece. The photo of Daniel as a toddler, covered in spaghetti sauce, beaming up at me. From his high chair, I kept that. Not for him, but for her. The mother I was back then. She deserved to be remembered. The necklace Emily wore on Instagram, I reported the theft. Didn't chase its return. Let her keep it. It was never about the object. It was about the line they crossed. I didn't need it back. I needed me back. And I had that now. I began compiling my journals into chapters, not for a book, not for publication, just to see the arc of my own becoming, to remind myself every time doubt crept in that I had already survived the hardest parts. One night, I reread the first pages, the shaky handwriting, the short sentences, the fear barely hidden between the lines. I wept, not because I was sad, but because I was proud. That version of me, so unsure, so heartbroken, had kept going, had picked up a pen, had lit a match in the dark. She deserved my respect, not my shame. And now I honored her with every breath I took freely. I'd started helping other women at the facility write letters to their families. Some wanted to forgive. Others wanted closure. A few just wanted to say, you don't get to define me anymore. They said I had a calming presence. I laughed at that. Maybe I've just cried enough tears to stop needing anyone else's approval. I wrote one last letter to Daniel. I didn't send it, but I needed to write it. Dear Daniel, you were the great love of my life for a long time, the reason I worked 2 jobs, the reason I smiled through exhaustion, the reason I believed in second chances. But you taught me something I never wanted to learn, that love without respect becomes control, that gratitude without boundaries becomes manipulation. I will always remember the boy you were. I've released the man you became. I wish you well. but I no longer wish to follow you into silence. I folded it and placed it in my notebook. A memory, a marker, a goodbye I could live with. Carla told me the settlement had gone through. The money was in a protected trust under my name. No more access for anyone but me. She suggested I use it for something meaningful. I'm not sure what I want, yet I said. But when I know, I won't hesitate, because now I trusted myself to choose, not out of guilt, not out of habit, but out of desire. I wasn't afraid of empty space anymore. I wasn't desperate to fill every moment with busyness or distraction. I had made peace with stillness. I had made peace with being alone, not as abandonment, but as autonomy. They left me with nothing, but nothing is fertile ground. And from that silence, I had built something wild, honest, and deeply mine. After everything, the confrontation, the settlement, the silence that followed, I thought my world would feel smaller, that the damage would close me in like walls, too tight to breathe within. But the opposite happened. Once I stopped trying to fit back into the shape they had left for me, something extraordinary began to unfold. My world got bigger, not louder, not busier, just wider, more honest, more mine. It began with a walk beyond the usual limits, past the hydrangeas planted out front, past the bench where the other residents played cards. There was a small trail behind the fence, nothing dramatic, just a path carved out by years of wandering feet. One day I asked the nurse if I could try it. "Are you sure?" she asked gently. "Absolutely," I replied. She brought my cane. I brought my silence. We walked slow, step by shaky step. Every tree felt like an altar. Every breeze a prayer I had once forgotten how to speak. And I realized halfway through that trail that this was what freedom tasted like. Not escape, but expansion. Not running, but reclaiming. I began saying yes to new things. I took a watercolor class through the community center, free for seniors. The teacher, a woman named Margot, had wild gray curls and an infectious laugh. She said my use of shadow was soulful. No one had ever used that word for me before. I met other women there too. Widows, divorcees, survivors of things no one put on plaques or talked about at family dinners. We shared our stories over weak coffee and beautiful imperfect art. Some cried, some didn't. But all of us were rebuilding something, and none of us were ashamed. I stopped wearing beige. It seems silly now, but it felt like a revolution. I bought a scarf with wild colors, deep crimson, cobalt blue, mustard yellow. I wore it like armor. One day, Leah the nurse grinned and said, "You look like you just stepped out of Paris." I told her, "More like I just stepped back into myself." She nodded, "Same thing." I even looked into relocating, not out of anger, not to escape the memory of Daniel, but because I wanted to choose where I lived, not let that choice be made for me. I toured a senior co-housing community, a small complex where everyone had their own apartment, but shared gardens, a library, communal dinners once a week. It was quiet, creative, and filled with people who had stopped pretending. I put in an application. The staff at the care facility were surprised. "You're really going to move?" "Yes," I said. "I'm not dying here." Because I wasn't dying. I was beginning. And beginnings, I've learned, don't announce themselves with trumpets. They whisper, in a brushstroke, in a walk down a trail. In the moment you look at yourself in the mirror and realize you've forgiven not just them, but yourself. For staying too long, for bending too far, for hoping too hard. That's the hardest part of healing, I think. Releasing your own shame. The shame of not seeing it sooner. The shame of believing love would be enough to shield you. But I see now that it wasn't my failure. It was theirs. And I will not carry their legacy on my back any longer. I have new things to carry now. A sketchbook, a pair of sturdy shoes, a scarf that looks like rebellion, and a self-respect that no one will ever take from me again. The morning I left the care facility, no one clapped, no one threw confetti. It wasn't that kind of moment. It was quieter, deeper, like a tide finally going out after years of crashing in. I wore my scarf, the one that made me feel like something blooming instead of fading. I had one small suitcase packed with essentials, a few books, my journal, some clothes, a watercolor set, and the photo of Danny from his spaghetti-smeared toddler days. I brought the version of him I could still love. The staff wished me well. Leah cried. I hugged her tight. You were the first person who saw me as a person here, I whispered. You reminded me how to listen, she said. I didn't cry, not because I wasn't moved, but because I had already shed the tears that needed to fall, the ones that belonged to that chapter. This was a new one. Carla picked me up in her old hatchback. She insisted, said she wouldn't let me ride in the shuttle like a package being returned. We talked lightly on the drive. Weather, books, nothing heavy. There was nothing left that needed to be dissected. The wound had closed. We pulled into the co-housing community mid-morning. It was modest but full of life. Laughter spilled out from open windows. Herbs grew in clay pots on balconies. Wind chimes danced on porch rails. There were art supplies left out on a communal table. Someone was baking bread. I could smell it. The manager, a man named Jules, greeted me with a warm smile and a firm handshake. Mrs. Elliott, he said. I smiled. Just Joan now. He showed me to my space, a small one-bedroom cottage with wide windows and wooden floors. There was a reading nook by the window, a kitchenette with cheerful yellow tiles, and a skylight in the bedroom. No beige walls, no plastic furniture, just light. Jules handed me the key. We're glad you're here. And I believed him. I set my suitcase down and looked around. No ghosts, no memories nailed to the walls, just a space to be whoever I wanted to be now. Later that evening, after I'd unpacked and hung my scarf over the back of the chair, I sat outside on the communal patio. A few other residents were already there. Someone poured wine. Another offered fresh fruit. They didn't ask me what had happened. They didn't ask for my story. They let me arrive as I was. And for once, that was enough. I thought about Daniel for a moment, not with pain, not with anger, just quiet. I wondered what he would think if he saw me here, laughing with strangers who felt more like family than he had in years. Painting, living. Would he feel guilt? Pride? Nothing at all. I let the question float away, because that was his journey now, not mine. I wasn't living in reaction to him anymore. I was living in response to me. And that shift, that quiet, undeniable reclamation was everything. I finished my wine, helped stack a few plates, laughed at someone's story about their cat and a ruined quilt. I walked back to my cottage under the moonlight, the air cool and honest on my skin. Inside, I sat by the window, wrote in my journal. Tonight, I didn't write about the past. I wrote about basil plants and the way laughter feels when it doesn't have to be forced, and how good it feels to be tired from joy, not survival. I closed the journal. No lock, no hiding, just a woman in a home she chose after a life she finally reclaimed, For so long, I waited for someone to come rescue me. My son, my daughter-in-law, the family that never knocked, never called. Even when I told myself I was independent, I still caught my eyes drifting toward the door, listening for a phone that didn't ring, a knock that never came. But sitting there in that little sunlit cottage, I realized something so clear. It felt like truth had finally found a shape I could hold. I was the person I had been waiting for all along. No night, no apology, no dramatic return. Just me. Me, with my stories and my scars. Me who had crawled through betrayal and come out clean on the other side. Me who stopped shrinking and started shining in the quiet. That night, I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror, toothbrush in hand, and smiled without flinching. I had come back to myself. That's not to say it was all easy. Grief still had its teeth. There were moments when I'd cut up an apple and suddenly remember how Daniel used to ask me to slice his really thin. Or when I'd hear a certain type of laugh and think of Emily's rehearsed chuckles at dinner. But grief is not the enemy. It's just love with nowhere to go. So I let it pass through me, not control me. I started volunteering at the local library once a week, reading aloud to kids. It wasn't much, just a few picture books and some silly voices. But they laughed. They hugged me. They called me Miss Joan. And in their small, sticky-handed affection, I found a different kind of motherhood, one that didn't ask me to sacrifice everything, just to show up, be present, be kind, no strings, no betrayal hiding in the corners, just connection. One day, a little girl with frizzy pigtails asked if I had any grandchildren. I paused, then smiled. No, sweetheart, but I've had a lot of love in my life. She nodded as if she understood far more than her years allowed. Maybe she did. Back home, I started a new painting. Not a landscape, not a still life, a self-portrait, not of who I used to be, the woman in aprons and worry and quiet desperation, but who I had become. Bold colors, soft strength, eyes that had seen too much and still sparkled. A woman seated tall, holding her own brush. I hung it over my writing desk, not to show off, but to remember. Because every time I saw it, I whispered a silent truth to myself. You didn't just survive them. You saved yourself from becoming them. It's a different kind of healing, the kind that doesn't demand justice in courtrooms or Facebook posts. It's quiet, persistent, slow as moss, but it lasts. I stopped chasing closure. Sometimes you don't get the conversation. Sometimes they don't explain. Sometimes they don't apologize. And still you move forward, not because you're over it, but because you're finally done carrying it. That's where I am now. Not healed, but healing. Not whole, but honest. And in that space, that in between that rebuilding, I found the only kind of peace that's real. Peace you earn by coming home to yourself. There's a strange kind of freedom that comes when you stop needing anyone to approve your life. Not defiant, not angry, just liberating. I used to ask myself questions I never dared to answer out loud. Would they love me more if I needed them less? Am I difficult or just done being used? What if I stopped trying to be the mother they wanted and started being the woman I actually am? Now I know the answers. I wasn't difficult. I was tired of shrinking to fit someone else's comfort, of being edited into their narrative as the convenient background character. So I stopped asking for permission to exist on my own terms. I wore what I liked, ate what I wanted, took up space, signed up for a ceramics class, even though my fingers didn't always cooperate. My first bowl wobbled like a child's attempt, but I loved it. Loved. It wasn't perfect. Neither was I. That was the point. A man named Fred, who lived 2 doors down, complimented it one day. "It's got soul," he said. That made me laugh. So does my left hip, too much of it. He chuckled. "We're all a little lopsided. The trick is not to pretend we're not." Fred started walking with me in the evenings. Nothing romantic, just 2 people exchanging bits of themselves under soft porch lights. He used to be a science teacher. Married once, widowed now. He missed ballroom dancing. I told him I missed the smell of cinnamon in a house I actually owned. "I bet you could bake," he said one night. "I used to," I replied. "Now I just paint cakes instead of cooking them." "Still counts," he smiled. It was the kind of companionship I never knew I needed, simple, unpressured kind. The kind that asks nothing of you but presence. We shared stories without trying to fix each other. He didn't ask about Daniel. I didn't ask about his wife. But our silences weren't empty. They were generous. And that's the difference I've learned in this new life. Some silences are cages. Others are doors you open yourself. I stopped attending every family day the facility held. I used to go, even when I knew no one would show up for me. Just sat in a folding chair while others were greeted with hugs and flowers. Not anymore. Now I plan my own days. I visited a botanical garden last month, paid for a ticket with my money, took my time through the orchids, and wept in front of a tree older than this country. Not out of sadness, out of awe, out of the recognition that life keeps blooming even after the worst winters, even after being cut back to the root. Sometimes, especially after. I started collecting postcards again, not to send, just to remind myself that the world is full of places I haven't seen and people I don't need to explain myself to. Each one I tack above my writing desk is a promise you are not done yet. Not because I need to chase youth, but because I've only just discovered what it means to belong to yourself. And I'll be damned if I waste another minute waiting to be invited. This life uneven quiet, colored with second chances, is mine now. And for the first time, I'm not trying to make it palatable for anyone else. I used to believe that the worst thing you could do to someone was betray them. Now, I know there's something even colder. Erasure. When someone rewrites your story without your consent. When they turn your name into a footnote. Your love into an inconvenience. Your existence into a background hum they'd rather mute. That's what they tried to do. Daniel, Emily, the ones who called it help while emptying my bank account, who placed me in that care facility like they were shelving a book they never planned to read again. They wanted to close the chapter. I picked up the pen and I rewrote the ending. No longer the tragic mother wasting away in silence. No longer the frail woman waiting for visitors who never came. No longer the echo of someone else's decisions. Now I was the narrator, not always eloquent, not always polished, but true. I wrote poems too. At first short and clumsy, then longer, sharper. The kind of poems that didn't rhyme, but still cut. I read one aloud at the community gathering. My hands trembled as I stood behind the podium. But when I finished, the room was quiet listening, and then they clapped, not politely, earnestly. Later, a woman named Sylvia came up to me in tears. That poem about forgetting who you are after raising everyone else. That was me, she said. I hugged her because I understood. There's so many of us women who gave everything and were handed silence in return. Women who were told we were too much and then too little and then not needed at all. But not anymore. We're not waiting to be remembered. We're reminding the world we're still here. That same week, I wrote to a publisher, not to get famous, just to ask if they accepted submissions for essays from seniors. They said yes, asked for samples. I sent 3. They replied, "We'd love to feature your story." I didn't tell anyone right away. Not because I wasn't proud, but because I'd learned that the most sacred joys are the ones you don't need to prove. That first piece was called "The Day I Stopped Being Convenient." They said it got more views than anything else that month. I printed it out, framed it, not to show off, to remember that my voice didn't die in that nursing home. It waited, patiently, quietly, like a seed under snow. And now it blooms in ink. I began helping other women write their stories too. Tuesdays became story circles. We sat in a circle of mismatched chairs with tea notebooks and open hearts. Some wrote about love, some about loss, some just made lists of things they missed. But in every word there was power, not loud, but alive. This was the life they thought they were denying me, the one filled with meaning, purpose, creation. They thought putting me in that facility would reduce me to silence. Instead, it gave me a vantage point, to look back, to look within, and to write forward. The pen is still in my hand, and for the first time in my life, I'm writing for me, not to be good, not to be loved, not even to be forgiven, but to be whole. The court case finally concluded. It took months, filing statements, signatures. Carla was steady through it all, and I trusted her like I hadn't trusted anyone in years. Daniel never showed up in person. His lawyer read a prepared statement, cold, legal, apologetic in tone, but not in truth, full of words like misunderstanding, oversight, best interest. I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. I just listened, because I already knew what I needed to know, that they didn't take accountability, that they never would, and that their guilt or lack of it wasn't mine to carry. The court awarded full restitution. Every dollar Emily and Daniel had siphoned was ordered to be returned. My house, long sold, became a line item in damages, interest, penalties, fees. They'd pay for years, but the moment the judge ruled, I realized something. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt light. Justice didn't make the pain go away. It didn't undo the loneliness of that hospital bed, the cold plastic tray of food, the sound of the door closing when they left me behind. But it untangled the lie that said I was powerless, the lie that said I was too old, too broken, too dependent to stand up. I had stood, and that would always matter more than any dollar amount. Carla took me to lunch afterward. Nothing fancy, a diner off the highway. We split fries, and she ordered a milkshake like we were high school girls skipping class. She raised her glass. To survival, I raised mine. To starting over. We laughed, and for the first time, I felt the laughter in my bones, not just a sound, a release. That night, back at the community, I sat on the porch and watched the sky change colors, dusky purple, then bleeding gold. It was a quiet evening. No music, no visitors, just me and the wind. And I realized there is no going back. There is no version of life where Daniel suddenly becomes the boy I once knew, where Emily walks in and apologizes with tears in her eyes, where the past is a wound we can dress together. There's just now, and I've made peace with that. I don't hate them anymore. Hating them means they still have space inside me, and I've worked too hard to make room for myself. I wish them accountability. I wish them growth, but I no longer wish them near me. That's what true freedom looks like. Not revenge, not bitterness, but disinterest. Their choices may define their future. They no longer define mine. The next morning, I bought a small gold bracelet, simple, understated, engraved with one word, returned, because that's what I am, not to a place, not to a role, but to myself. They left me with nothing, but in that nothing, I found space to see, to choose, to rebuild. And in that courtroom, I didn't win my life back. I claimed it. I used to fantasize about closure, some perfect moment where Daniel stood at my door, eyes full of regret, apology trembling on his lips. Maybe he'd say, "I see it now, Mom. I'm sorry for all of it." And I'd hold his face, forgive him, and we'd find our way back. But life doesn't give you movies. It gives you choices. And I chose peace, not perfection. Forgiveness, not for them, but for me. Because carrying their betrayal like armor was exhausting. I was tired of wrapping myself in it every morning like a shield against the world. So I laid it down, piece by piece, not to forget, but to free my hands to hold better things. One morning I made cinnamon rolls from scratch. It took twice as long with my hands, but I didn't mind. The smell filled my little cottage, sweet and warm like childhood. I poured a cup of tea, plated a roll, and sat in the garden as birds flitted through the branches above. The cinnamon roll was imperfect, a little lopsided, too much glaze, but it was mine, made with joy, not duty. And I cried when I tasted it, because for the first time I felt safe. Not because someone made me feel that way, but because I had finally stopped making space for people who didn't value me. That day, I wrote a new journal entry. I don't need an apology to heal. I just need to stop bleeding for people who keep handing me knives. I no longer speak of Daniel often. Sometimes I remember his laugh as a child, and it makes me smile. Sometimes I see a boy walking beside his mother and wonder if he'll turn out kind. But Daniel, he's a chapter I've closed. One I won't reread, not because I've forgotten, but because I've learned. My story isn't about the ones who left. It's about the one who stayed me. I planted lavender by my windowsill, bought a typewriter at a garage sale, and taught myself to use it. Started waking up early just to listen to the quiet, not the sad, abandoned kind of quiet, the sacred kind, the kind that says you made it. Every now and then, people ask how I found the strength. I tell them the truth. I didn't find it. It was always there. I just stopped giving it away. Now I give it to my writing, to my friendships, to the small rituals that make life feel like mine again. Tea at sunrise poems, scribbled on napkins, humming while folding laundry. I gave up waiting for someone else to make my life feel whole. And that decision, that quiet daily recommitment to myself, was the most radical act I've ever done. They left me with nothing. But I filled the silence they left behind with my own voice, and the echo that returned was mine. There's a quiet kind of triumph that comes when you realize you no longer need to win. Not the argument, not the affection, not even the justice, because you've stepped so fully into your own life that theirs no longer overlaps with yours. That's where I am now. It hit me one evening as I sat watching the stars. There was no noise, no television, no radio, just the creak of my chair, the faint rustle of wind, and the steady living breath of a world that had kept turning even while mine had collapsed. And I had turned with it, not as the woman who had been used, not as the mother who had been discarded, but as me, Joan Elliott. I say my name now, like it's a spell, like it's a door I finally walk through after years of waiting on the porch. It is mine, all of it, the name, the body, the story. Somewhere along the way, I stopped measuring my life in losses, stopped counting the missed calls, the unreturned texts, the holidays spent alone, started counting something else instead. How many days I smiled without reason. How many poems I wrote without censoring myself. How many women I held space for without asking for anything in return. And how many mornings I woke up and didn't dread what the day would bring, because whatever it was, I knew I could handle it. Fred and I still take walks, still laugh about his obsession with crossword puzzles and my refusal to ever play Scrabble. We're not anything people would label, but there's comfort in knowing someone will notice if I'm not at breakfast, that someone knows the sound of my laugh, that I am seen, not for what I give, not for what I fix, but for simply existing. I used to think being invisible was the worst fate. Now I know what's worse, being seen only for how useful you are. That was my life before. Now I see myself. I carry myself like someone worth protecting because I am. And in protecting myself, I've started dreaming again, not of the past, but of the future. I'm considering traveling. There's a writing retreat in Oregon, all older women, no agenda, but tea and words and walks through pine forests. Carla sent me the link. I bookmarked it, not because I needed permission, but because the girl I once was the one with wild hair and notebooks full of poems she'd want me to go. And for the first time, I'm not too tired to say yes. This chapter of my life doesn't have a name yet, but if I had to give it one, I'd call it Belonging to Myself, because that's what they could never take. That's what they never understood. When you stop needing to be chosen by others, you choose yourself. And that's the greatest piece of all. Some people expect a grand finale, an apology shouted in the rain, a reunion over tea softened by time and tears. But life, I've learned, is quieter than that, messier, simpler, truer. Daniel never came back. Emily never wrote. And the door, it stayed open, but not for them, for me. So I could walk through it whenever I chose, not as someone waiting, hoping breaking, but as someone whole. And I have walked through that door every day since, into a life that is smaller in size, but larger in meaning. A life that doesn't bend toward anyone's expectations but my own. Last week, I hosted a small gathering at the community. Just a few of us. Tea, shortbread cookies, some music from an old record player. Someone brought a guitar. Someone else sang a bit off key. It was beautiful, and it was enough. One of the women, a retired nurse named Helen, pulled me aside at the end of the night. You know, she said, you remind me of a lighthouse, quiet, steady, always shining, even if no one notices. That made me cry, not because I felt seen, but because for the first time I didn't need to be. I knew who I was. I had stood at the edge of abandonment and built a home there. And I had filled that home with color kindness words and warmth, not for a performance, not for redemption, just because I could. That's on the part they never expected. They thought taking everything would silence me. But all it did was give me space to hear my own voice more clearly. And once I heard it, I never let it go quiet again. Some treasures had been recovered, my savings, my name, my freedom. But the ones that mattered most, those were never in a bank. They lived in my quiet persistence, in the way I reached for a pen when I could have curled inward, in the way I learned to take up space again, not out of defiance, but out of worthiness. I had spent a lifetime giving everything I had, and when I was emptied, I found a deeper well. It wasn't the ending I'd expected. It wasn't a family restored. It wasn't a clean apology or some perfect reconciliation. It was better. It was real, harder, clearer, more honest, and above all else, it was mine. I've stopped trying to rewind time or rewrite other people. Now I write me. Each page forward is a page I've earned, not with bitterness, but with courage. Not with revenge, but with peace. And if you've ever felt like they left you with nothing, hear this. Nothing is just where something beautiful has room to grow. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.